gang, welcome to Open Studio on Mixed Media Monday, and I hope everybody had a great long weekend. I know we have lots of people watching from Canada and the US, and a big weekend for everybody, so I hope it was nice where you were and you had a great time. Now it's back to work, right? Okay, so for Mixed Media Monday today, I had a request which kind of takes us throwback to Makeover Monday, and it's how to integrate photos. So what I did was I selected a photo that I had printed a while ago, and it's just a cute little image, and I'm going to incorporate it into a pre-made background. Hi, Emmy. So because I've had this request to keep showing people how to integrate images, I thought I would go back to Makeover Monday and combine Mixed Media Monday, and today we'll just go right into combining the two elements again. So hi Alona. I don't think you guys can get enough of this image integration thing, so I'll start with why I chose this image and why I chose the background I chose. So the image itself is, it's small, but it's going to be proportional to the board I've chosen, and I'll show you why. So if I were, you can see that this is already on a 12 by 12 or something like that square. So that is, for all intents and purposes, the entire image. Now, when I'm thinking of image incorporation, I'm also thinking of like the size of the panel will also, and the placement will also change this entirely. So there's this little girl here with aspirations of flying and travel and all that stuff, but I'm thinking on a longer panel, it could mean so much more. It could mean, that there's something, I could switch out what's in her hand. I could, do you see what I'm saying? Like, we could add so much more to this story than just this image. So this image, because it takes up 3/4 of the intended, let me fold it so I can get rid of the white. It takes up like a good 3/4 of the image, or of the entire space, right? So this is the only thing to look at. So when I'm thinking of image integration, sometimes I'm thinking bigger or smaller. So when I say smaller, it's like you zoom in on one little part, so your board can be much smaller and you can remove a lot of the excess. So that helps you tell the story, right? And in this case, I'm thinking the story should be so much bigger and so much taller. So going through my repertoire of backgrounds, I have this really long panel. I think it's like a 12 by 36 or something, and I figured because of the tones that are already in here, and there's a lot of texture on here, what I was going to do is integrate these two images. So I'm going to, without further ado, turn the camera down, and I'll continue talking about image integration and why and all that good stuff. So let me just turn the camera down. And because it's such a long board, I might try to squish this up a little bit and then turn the camera. How am I going to do this? Let me just, give me 1 sec to adjust. There we go. So I'll just push this into view so that you can see what I'm doing. Alright, so ideally I'd have this camera behind me right now, but I didn't think of the length of the board. So what I'm going to do is I could decide, like I said, so this image, as it is a 12 by 12 and it's cut off, right? This is the entire story. So when I want to expand on a story, or I want to condense a story, like I said, I could crop out just this and put it on a really tiny panel, and that would tell an entirely different story. I can illustrate that. That would tell an entirely different story than more paper, than what's being presented right now, right? Like, let's say we crop that out, and that's the only thing that we showed in our painting. So this has so much potential, because here it is, this little girl with flight goggles looking up. So the potential is huge for just that. So when we're looking at telling a story, we really have to make sure that the image isn't always considered at face value. So I wouldn't look at this image because it's a 12 by 12 and say I need to put it on a 12 by 12 board, because then I'm just kind of telling the same story over and over again. What I am interested in doing, however, is I'm interested in integrating it into this board, but also telling a new story. So because this image is cut off, I have several options. I could put a band at the bottom, but I think for my purposes, I think I'm just going to cut her out and collage it in, and then we'll go from there. So why not just collage the whole thing on? Is probably a question some of you are wondering. So the backgrounds are similar, but you can see I've already got a lot going on this background. So this background was done with probably layers and layers of modeling paste and crackle mediums and stains and everything else. It's a pretty background, but it needs something else. So if I were to put this 12 by 12 paper on here, collage the whole thing on, I would be losing that background. So a transfer is also possible, but then I would be losing a lot of the contrast because we need the white of this image to really make the impact. So let me grab some scissors, which is something that I thought I had nearby. Here we go. And I'll cut this out, and you'll see why I've done what I've done in this case. So, oh, I should probably find my glasses too, but oh, let's just wing it. So because I just got this image off the internet, couple things. Will I sell it, the painting? Yes, probably. Will I ever make this one painting? Will I ever make copies of it? Absolutely no. So that includes, by the way, just so you guys know, because a lot of you always ask me about copyright issues, I don't know where this image came from. Did I find it from copyright free? I can't remember. I printed a long time ago. So therefore, I wouldn't even social media this one. So this painting, for sale, I'll put it on my site, but I wouldn't even social media, not for the risk of somebody losing your, or finding your painting and saying, hey, that's my photograph, and you've infringed on my rights, right? So there's a lot of integrity when you are working with someone else's photographs and someone else's images, in that, first of all, yes, it's probably a copyright infringement, but secondly, I also respect other artists and their work, and I don't want to steal someone else's work and lay credit to it all my own. Even though I will be changing this more than 75%, I still respect the work of other artists, so I would love to give credit where credit is due. So if I ever found out, first of all, whose art this was or whose photograph this was, if it wasn't abundantly clear on their website where I got this image from, then I would track them down and I would ask them for permission of use. Most times, someone will likely give you permission for use to make one. And I've contacted hundreds of different artists and associations and families that represent copyrighted work. And the answer most times comes back as long as you're making one, so that's considered fine art original art. When you make fine art original art, you are allowed to make one using the same image as many times as you want. However, the painting has to change every single time, and no reproductions or copies can be made. So that includes greeting cards, that includes t-shirts, leggings, anything like that. So as soon as you make reproduction of that, you need a license. So that's just a little talk on that. I wouldn't take this image and make oodles of copies of it, or even plaster it all over social media, even when I'm done the painting, just because the work does belong to somebody else, and I'm not entirely familiar with who that person might be. Therefore, I can't really ask permissions, and that's that. So I hope that's clear. Just always remember the question of it being one of integrity. So if it was your image, if it was your art, would you want everyone capitalizing on it, sharing it, and or making cards of it or whatever. So I think you guys know the answer to that. So just ask yourself a question of ethics and you'll always be safe. So that being said, this image is almost cut out. It doesn't have a lot of fussy parts, which is really good. I actually have decided to cut out the little white part behind the wings because my background is very textured and very modeled, and there is a tiny fear there that if I get rid of it, that that if I leave the white there, it might just be over a really important spot. So now I'm just going to play with where I want to put this. I've decided to put her really down low because I want to tell a different story on the rest of the painting. So I think she can go right about there. No, I think I'll put her off to the edge. Okay, so what am I going to use for this? I'll probably just use my spray Mod Podge. As all you know, the Ultra Matte, my new favorite glue medium, because how simple is this? I just spray where it's going and I spray the paper, and I have a high intensity bond. No brushes, no muss, no fuss. There we go. And then where there is excess glue, because I didn't know where it was going, there we go. I am going to use a baby wipe because they're convenient and they're right here. And I'm just going to wipe off any excess. So that is, yeah, that's that. So now you see it's kind of gray and all that. That's okay. It's just wet. The paper is wet from the glue. And that will happen on such a big image. But now I have the rest of the panel to work at and look at and to decide what's going to happen, right? So I'm going to turn this a little bit so that you guys can see the entire thing. And see if I can't get this angled a little bit, pardon the seasickness, so that you guys can see the whole panel all at once. Do you see the image? It's down here. I need to move it a little bit. With all the comments I can't see. If you guys can see, give me 1 sec. There's that hand. So I'm assuming you can see. All right, let's hope you can see what I'm doing here. Okay, so image integration. So until this is perfectly dry, I'm not going to be able to get a very good visual on what's happening. But I do need to seat this image in here so it's not as stuck on. So that is one of a pet peeve of mine of mixed media, is when an artist fails to kind of blur the lines between the painting and the image and makes no attempt to incorporate. And it doesn't mean that it has to be like seamless, that has to be, it's just like that there's a little effort to show that the image was pulled in. I don't ever try to make anyone believe that I hand drew something or painted something. That's not my intent. My intent is just really so that the two things don't look like hand painted background, image stuck on top. I just want the two to have some relationship, and that they move throughout the painting. The other thing I like to do is I like to make sure that my entire painting is telling a bit of a story, right? Like, so I have to be either literal and tell the story of, like, she's got an airplane in her hand, she's dreaming of becoming a pilot, let's say, and so up in the sky there's actually like a big 747 flying through the sky. So that could tell like a very different story. Or this could just be like a metaphor, right, for looking up and onwards and having dreams and that sort of thing. So then the rest of it could turn into a bit of a fantasy dream world of laying down plans for the future. So I really have no direction for this just yet, so I'm going to think about it a little bit. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to dry up this image, and once I dry it up, then I'll be able to seal it. So I want to be able to protect this image, and because it's quite large, and if I do a lot of water media to this, I can actually risk damaging the image, especially if you're using baby wipes and things like that. Baby wipes and everything are extremely corrosive to painted surfaces and water and things like that. So if you're ever wondering where water rings come from on furniture, it's just that water is actually super corrosive, as are the baby wipes used in that context. So let me grab a little heat gun. I'll be right back. There we go. So I'm going to use an embossing gun. Couple reasons for the embossing gun, but first and foremost, it is the least heat. It's like a hair dryer, but it doesn't produce as much wind, but it produces more heat than a hair dryer, and it's less intense than a heat gun, because a heat gun actually will probably blister this paper because it's actually too hot. So give me a moment here to just warm this up and dry it up. Essentially, we're just asking the moisture to leave the paper and the adhesive to be the only thing left binding the two things. The gray from where the moisture had seeped through will evaporate, and then I'll have a nice white barrier between my top image and the background. So that's another reason for sealing it. There we go. You can see the image is becoming much brighter now, and that's just because the moisture is leaving. There we go. So I think this is pretty dry. Another way of telling if something is dry is it's cool if it's wet. And this feels, I'm letting it cool down, but this feels like it'll be room temperature, which means it's good for sealing. So there's a couple ways I can seal this. And one, and my favorite, again, looks like I'm doing commercials for Mod Podge, but I just absolutely am digging these new products that they're making. But they have a clear acrylic sealer, and the one that I like is matte, obviously. I like that because it's a spray, it's fast, and then you can seal in anything that might be water soluble, might move later. However, I'm going to use a different medium. In the event that I want to transition this into an encaustic painting, I'll probably stick with a clear gesso made by Liquitex. So this just happens to be one of my favorite sealers. I use it often. It leaves the surface feeling like it's clear, but it leaves the surface feeling like sandpaper. So it's got a lot of tooth to it. And it does a really nice job of sealing in the paper, sealing in the color. And it also has a little, because of the grit in it, what I like is the edges tend to, it tends to ramp up on the edges a little bit, which is great for later on when I want to integrate, because I don't have that sharp edge of the paper versus the image itself. So once I've brushed that all in, I can feel it, but it's not dry yet, so I'm just going to, again, take my embossing gun, warm it up, and speed up that process. There we go. Now, quick little art lesson here beyond the mixed media image integration. So aside from your own personal stories you like to tell, visual storytelling, you're actually having to look at, or what you should consider looking at, is when you've integrated an image, it creates automatically it creates a unique focal point, right? Because we had this big I always call it the sea of same. So this whole background is all very similar. It's very same. It's very pleasing. It's very calming. It's got similar tones, and it's got lots of interest and depth. Anyway, it's a sea of same for me. There's a lot of the same going on, and now I've introduced something new. But not only have I introduced something new, but I've introduced something that's an entire different color value. So out here I've got cream and light gray moving up to a darker charcoal gray, and that's what's happening in the background. Down here I've now introduced black and white. So your eye always starts in a painting at the greatest area of high and low value in contrast to one another. So because this painting is all grays and creams, and here I've introduced quite a significant amount of black and white, I have to now make some balance, because if your eye starts here, we need a similar tonal value in greater amount. So it has to be smaller than and different than this to pull you up and through the painting. So I need to put something at the top of this painting that is going to balance these two things out and keep you moving through the painting. So I have a few options. I can collage, I can do, now if I go up there, can you guys see the top? Let's see how far you can get. So you can see about there, and this is where the image is. Okay, so I'm going to put something just up there so that we can illustrate our point. So I'm going to grab a little bit of black and white collage paper, and I'll just put it up here where you guys can still see. So assuming that's the top, there's still another good foot to go, but let's just assume that that's the top. You can see how now your eye can easily travel from this little bit of black and white up here. Although this might be, because of its size, the greatest area of black and white. So what we're doing is we're either looking here or we're looking here, but because there's no pull through the painting, our eyes kind of play a little bit of ping pong, right? They go between that one and 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 that one. And the background, which unfortunately, as beautiful as it is, has become very mid-tone. So mid-tone is when it's like, it becomes background noise. It's like when you've been listening to music for 5 hours and you just go, did I listen to anything? It's because it just really didn't catch your attention. There wasn't anything. You may have heard one song, and that was like the black and white contrast, but then everything else was very mid-tone. So it's the same thing that happens in a painting. Our eye goes to the poppy, choppy song, and then it just bounces between those, and everything else becomes sort of mid-tone. So in order to carry you through that, I'm going to have to change this up a little bit. And I'm thinking it may start with a bit of toning this up into, so instead of having this dark, I'm talking myself through this as I'm doing it. Now, I never have anything planned when I'm doing these videos, so you guys are just watching me make my mistakes live or make my triumphs live, and then be able to adapt and adjust and all that and explain my way through them. For those of you who are interested in mixed media, it gives you a bit of an understanding of what I'm doing and why. So that's why I do these videos now, is in order to help those who are in the process of doing this to better their work, to better understand, and to better move through their painting. And for those of you who are new, I'm hoping to get you hooked so that you just love to watch and support the arts and get you hooked on mixed media painting. Okay. To which I have lots of classes online now that you can subscribe to. In fact, I'll be releasing a big one this week. And it'll be for all levels, and it's skill set building, so I encourage you to follow me and to follow my YouTube channel, Christina Lovisa, and then also to visit the website, ChristinaLovisa.com. But for now, let's just get us image integrated. I'm not sure that I like her curls, so I'm just going to diminish them a little bit. Nothing against her curls, but they're just the way I cut them out. It didn't look like hair, it looked like a bit of a mess. So I'm going around this fairly carefully because I'm trying not to get the paint onto the image itself, because I'm relying on that contrast to help me. But at the same time, I'm diminishing a little bit of that background so that we can actually see what is happening in this painting. So especially this airplane, like I said, I could change out this airplane and I could make it anything. I could even get rid of her arms so she's not holding something. But for now, let's hold on to this plane and let's see where this takes us. But by eliminating some of this background, I'm making it less of a contrast between here and what's happening up top. So the mid-tone is now becoming a bit of a darker tone because of the way I'm seeding this image right now with some white paint. Whoops. So again, this is the reason why we protect the image, because I just got paint on it and I was able to wipe it off with my finger, but had it not been sealed, it might have absorbed some of that paint. And then my first instinct would be the baby wipe, and if I had done that, then I might have removed some of the image. So I created a lot of texture on this board, which is actually to my advantage now, because as I dry brush up, it's easy to get it to fade through and really draw your attention to that pattern. So again, I'm not sure when this image, when I printed this image, I don't remember because I just keep a stack of images. But at the same time, I don't remember when I made this background. So because I'm not really familiar with what is in the underlying substrates and things like that, I can't tell you about what created the background, whether it was modeling paste or just a simple drywall compound. I really don't know. But this is one of the advantages of having lots of backgrounds already ready, as we've talked about in so many other videos that we've done together over the past few months. Having your backgrounds ready is fantastic, because then when you actually feel like painting and you feel like being creative, or you find the perfect image, you can sort of match it, if you will, to the perfect background, rather than having to start from scratch and create the background and risk getting too excited and incorporating the image too early, and all those good things we've talked about over the past few months. And I'm gonna have to get a smaller brush to get in there so I don't make such a mess. There we go. So now under here, the thing you guys can't see, but under where I'm painting, under the image, there's a lot of texture, right? Because the same texture that's up there is down here. So as I'm painting, I'm picking up on some of that texture. And when I baby wipe it back in a few minutes, once you see me start to integrate this a little bit, that texture is going to be the first thing that will release the color of the white paint that I've put on top. And you'll see it'll actually be very beneficial, because it's really going to show more of a relationship between the background and the image itself. So one thing you want to be careful about when you're doing your photo or your image integration is that you never exceed the contrast that already exists when you're first laying down your first layer. So I'm going to explain that in a different way. I chose white because the lightest color on here was white. So if I decide to go darker, I wouldn't go any darker than the dark that's in her glasses. So I wouldn't use like whole pitch black in this case, because it's more of like a dark charcoal. It's just in contrast to all these grays. I'm getting a beautiful contrast and relationship now to the background. But what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't start this integration with something that was so foreign from the actual image itself. I like to pick out something that's in the background so that when I am incorporating them, it's just that, it's an incorporation. So now I'm going to start to use the baby wipes, and I'm going to start dabbing around the image and start to pull the paint away. So what that's going to do is it's actually going to make it look a little bit like hand painted, not right up to the edge, but because we went right up to the edge, that paint will actually stay on the edge, and then the rest, you can see down here, the rest is starting to pull you out into the painting. So I can leave the white heavy in some spots, which is my goal, is to make it look varied. I don't want it to be exactly the same all the way around, because then we're kind of outlining, right? And we don't want to outline ever when we're incorporating our images. We want to incorporate, we don't want to outline them, because when you just outline everything, like meaning you do it all the way around everything, what you're actually doing is you're drawing attention to the fact that you've stuck something on. So it's not really integrating, it's outlining, and that outlining is telltale that you've stuck an image on there. So I'm not trying to hide the fact that this is an image, but what I'm trying to do is show the seamless integration between the background and the foreground, which is this image. You shouldn't be able to just, here's a good tip, you shouldn't be able to just remove this image and have the painting still like stand alone, that you could just swap out a different image, because it really is like the image itself is being integrated so seamlessly because of color choice, because of how you've selected the first color, like I did on this one, white, for integration. It shouldn't be as easy as just popping this image out and putting in a different one without having to change so many other elements. If any of you have ever tried that, because I know I've heard it from students over the years, you know, they get frustrated with their paintings, and then the first thing they say is, I want to paint over it. So they grab the white gesso or they grab the white paint and they paint over everything. And then that doesn't seem to work, so then they rip the image out and they'll put another image in, and what they actually don't realize is that they're just making an entirely different painting, and they're just adding to the layers. So mixed media is nothing but layers, and so some layers are always more successful than other layers, and it should never be looked at as you know, one is a success and one is not, and that sort of thing. It just all adds to the layering. So image incorporation is, because I've had so many questions about how to do it, there's no real like one way, because each time you do it, it's going to be vastly different from the time you did it before, because it's so dependent on so many factors, including what your background is made of, how it's made, what the colors are, what the textures are, and then what image you're incorporating and what story is that image telling. So the first thing we did with this one, if you'll remember, or if you weren't here for the beginning, the very first thing I did was this image actually was isolated to a 12 by 12 border. So because it had the borders that were 12 by 12, what it was actually really saying was that was the entire image. So for me, I've added it to a 36 by 12 panel, And what that's done is it's opened up the possibilities for this storytelling, right? So there's so much more possibility awaiting this little girl with her goggles on, looking up to the sky, that I don't know where it's going yet. I just know that I'm working at it right now from a technical standpoint, and that technical standpoint is just balancing out my value scale and my value tones so that I'm able to keep my eye moving through this painting. So unless some brilliant idea crosses my mind and I'm interrupting my train of thought here, I'm just going to keep incorporating this and doing like the busy work. And then once that I do get to that point where I have to start integrating that, then I will rely on my creative, I'm going to call them my helpers, my muses at this point, to help me out as to what's next, because that idea hasn't come to me yet as to where this is going, but I'm happy in doing the necessary work to get it incorporated. So we have a bit of a seam here that I'm just working to soften by bringing some of the white up on my dirty cloth and then removing some of the lower, so that just helps for a more seamless integration. That's good. So now I'm going to come back in with the white in more of a dry brush capacity. That was a little heavier than anticipated, and I'm going to just now soften a little bit of the areas that maybe I removed too much. Again, I'm not outlining. I'm being careful not to outline. And how I'm picking and choosing and selecting the areas for a bit more white is just trial and error. So if I don't like it, I remove it. If it's good there, then I'll leave it. Going up to the goggles, I'll avoid, only because that's going to create a really strong impact of black and white together. And at this point, I don't want to leave your eyes sort of like stuck in this one area. So I'm going to leave that contrast. It's funny, her curls that I didn't want to, now I almost look like a little wing. She's like a little angel now. Come in here with a bit more white. Even though her arm is very white, I'm kind of happy with the contrast or lack thereof in that area. I think it's actually kind of nice. So again, there's no rule. It's just, I don't know, do you like it? Then leave it. If you think there's something off about it, keep painting it. I'm going to get some more intense down here. Keep that integration nice and strong. So around the airplane, you can see that I've got the white that in some spots looks a little outlined. So the reason it looks a little outlined is because of the lip of the paper. And as I'm baby wiping it, right, it's avoiding going into those areas. So I'm just going to add a little white to those areas just so that I can make it look a little less outlined. So I might go back in with a bit of charcoal afterwards, but for now I'm just going to keep that white in good contrast down here too. Got a little too much cutout. So look at the areas in your paintings where it looks absolutely cut out, and do something about that. So if that means coming in and calming it down with paint, do that. If that means going in and adding what we'll do in a moment, which is the dark, adding a shadow, then do that. But play with different things until the cutout no longer looks like a cutout and it's more seamlessly integrated into the actual image itself. Now, because I have this image protected with my clear gesso, one of the things I enjoy doing is coming back in with sketching pencils, both soluble and water soluble. And what have we got here? So this is just a regular old pencil, and here we have a wet proof black. Let's see what that does. And I just like to do a little sketching on top of the image. So again, it's just another little trick. Pardon me, my pencil sharpener is jammed up. So it's just another little integration trick, right? I'm not trying to claim that I drew this. It's just another way of making it a bit more my own. The other thing about this image is it's very pixelated, which means that I picked it off the internet from a very small image, and then when I printed it large, I have this pixelation going on. So I can also dull a bit of that, and I can come in and hand sketch a little bit just over top of the lines that are already existing. And I can also remove a little bit of the obvious pixelation if that's something that you want to do. I also like, because my hand's not very steady when it comes to illustrating, I like my hand at adding sort of rough sketching lines. That's one of the things I enjoy about my own hand. I've learned to embrace the fact that because I'm not very steady or very patient, I like that I get wonky lines. Now over here where she does have curly hair, I'm going to probably use this is a water soluble pencil. And then that way I can just soften some of those lines with a bit of water. So the other thing I'd be careful not to do is, because these pencils, especially the water soluble ones, tend to be really black. They really have a lot of intensity to them. I tend not to use this in areas other than the ones that are already black. Like for instance, there's a bit of gray here, and there's a lot of gray in the plane. There's a little bit of black, so I might add a little bit. But I have to be careful with the black, because once you apply a bit of water to this black, you're going to see it's like really intense, and we're really changing that that value contrast between the top and the bottom. So I'm going to use my paintbrush that has a bit of white still left in it, and I'm just going to come in and soften some of that black. So if I use a clear paintbrush, which I will in a moment, what it's going to do is it's going to create a very intense dark shadow, but I'm picking up some of this dark with the white dirty paintbrush that already exists, because it's able to soften. That little bit of white is able to soften some of that black, because I don't want it to be as intense as that pencil actually is on its own. So you can already see that's very intense, and I'm ramping up my contrast, which, as you guys will remember, will affect the entire painting. So the white water is actually, like I said, helping break up that intensity a little bit. And I'm just kind of going up and over into the image a little bit. Yep, and it's still too intense in some spots, and you guys can see that, I'm sure, like clearly, but that's okay. I'll go in and I'll soften them. And there's a couple ways of softening them. See, it looks a little too cartoony there, right? So I have a couple things I can do. So one, I can just put a baby wipe on it and I can lay it down and I can pick up, just by pressing, I can pick up some of the intensity. And then it looks more intense at this point, but that's okay. And I'm just going to take a bit of my white and a bit of my watered down white. And I'm just going to soften it again. And if it's still too much, then I really am just going to go in there with a paper towel and remove it. So, like I said, you have to be super careful with these pencils because they add so much intensity. But because we've protected the image right from the beginning, remember the way we put the clear gesso on there, it actually protects that image, so I'm able to just go back in and soften and remove without damaging the image. There, so it's just enough. Then now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, like, there's opportunity in here for adding some color, right? So when we're looking at like her scarf, I don't know what color I'm going to use yet, but I'm going to use, I'll show you how I can just incorporate a bit of color as well at the same time and test it. Like, I'll just try this color on for size. I don't have to be committed to it. This is a water-soluble crayon. And let's just assume that it goes down here, although I'm not 100% sure how the scarf goes. It's a water-soluble crayon, so I'm just going to drew it on, and now I've got a clean brush with a bit of water in it, and now I can soften the crayon and try it on for size. See what we think of the color. I'm going to take some of that because it's water-soluble, and I'm going to blend it into that black. So we're coming up with like a gray pink scarf. Alright, get some more water and a clean brush. Move some of this pink around up into the dark, which will become our shadow. So because we're testing this color, I have a few options. If I love this pink here and I'm like, yep, that's the color for me, even if I change it later, what I might want to do is then just take my spray, right, my fixative spray, and seal it. Because all this crayon and all these marks I've just been adding have been, remember, they've all been done with water-soluble product, water-soluble crayon, water-soluble pencil. So because they're water-soluble, if I go and do anything afterwards that moves things, even placing varnish on or just working nearby with glue or anything, I could potentially damage anything that I've just done. So it would be in my best interest to take that spray and give it a little shot to protect what I've got going on. So already a bit of color there is opening up new possibility, right? It's now starting to tell a different story. It's now starting to move me through the painting a little bit. So this is where I tend to do a little bit of, and this is the part that I think gets lost with a lot of people, because I show this technique and then I look at some of your paintings and they look outlined. And so I know I've failed you when I tell you not to outline and then I see so many people outlining. So I'm gonna try, and maybe I'll just explain it like so many times until the point where you guys get it and you go, oh, it makes sense. So I've put a few very, very, very tiny lines with a black water-soluble pencil. And I'm talking a few. So I'm gonna go back in here as well. So these lines have been meant so that if I go up to the image with a wet paintbrush and just drag it a little bit in both directions and pull it out, I'm just creating a little tiny line. And I'm going to do the same around the back of the helmet. So it's not an outline everywhere, guys. It's just a few areas, right? We've added the highlight first by putting the white in, and now we're adding a bit of volume by adding a shadow. So I'm putting in a thin little black line first just to illustrate how few places I actually do this in. And that one dirty brush line is carrying me quite a ways. I'm going to do the same up here. And also, I'm not afraid to leave that watercolor line looking gray. A lot of you make it really intense and really black, and there's nothing wrong with that, but if it's not integral to your design, like this little bit of black around the airplane you see is doing enough to have you like pop over it and not linger here. Our eye doesn't get stuck in this airplane, right? We can move on. I'm gonna make a few more lines. We can move on because it's just enough intensity to keep us interested for a moment and then to move on because of the black and white contrast. So, like I said, I think I failed you guys in leading you to believe that there's a lot more black going on when I'm integrating an image than there actually is. It's very, very subtle. And that does take practice. I'm not gonna lie, it's not like, but evaluate some of the images you guys have done, and then you can see where there might be just a wee bit too much. So what is too much? Too much is when you look at your paintings with an absolute critical eye and you go, wow, my eye gets stuck there. So this bit of black and white up here, it's so intense that your eye sticks there, right? So that's too much. We're not going to put it there. But down here, we have just enough black and white contrast that we're able to move through this image. Now, in here, I've used non-water soluble pencil, and that's because I'm trying to cut out some of the pixelation. Sorry, I had to pause on that word for a sec. I tried to remove some of the pixelation. So I'm not sure I want to make these goggles that intense. And then also by using like just a regular graphite pencil, you can add more sketching lines and things like that. You can make it a bit more, and then we don't have to worry about those moving, right? So they're not, if you brush them, they're not water soluble. But now I lost a bit of my contrast. So I'll show you another little technique that I will use often. So in here it looks like I could use a bit of a shadow on her. Do you guys see that? There's this weird little spot that I just think could use a bit more intensity. There we go. Also maybe up under here. She could use a bit of intensity. So when you add the black, remember you're really punching up the value and the contrast. So you can remove it, but it just takes patience and it takes practice, because you have to use that critical eye to determine where it could use a bit more and where it could use a little bit less. Okay, so on this side of her, I just wanted that arm to look a little less, and in here I've got just a wee bit too much, so I'm just going to dab it out. There. Okay, so let's add some of the highlight back in. So we have a few options for adding highlight back in. I personally like the white markers, because we're able to get some different lines. This is an ultra fine. I'm going to use something a little fatter. So these are actually available now at acuratednest.com. at my store's website. This is a product that I love because it writes over top of everything. It's not going to move. It's a permanent highlight, but what's great about it is I can remove some of that pixelation, and you can see with these goggles, removing that pixelation and picking up on the highlight is really changing this whole appearance. There we go. Now down here, I'm going to change some of that. Beauty. And then in here, there. Nice. Okay, so, and then maybe some of her curls, right? Maybe they want to be highlighted again. And maybe a bit over the helmet. Looking good. Also has a little white line in the scarf. And then the other thing we could do is we could make some fun things, right? Give her a few dots on her scarf. Added interest. Where would that dot be? Let's say it's along here, and it kind of disappears in the folds. Nice. Okay, so this image has been like kind of altered now, right? It's played with, it's manipulated. I still have some areas that I would go in and I would remove the pixelation marks, but for all intents and purposes, this image now is way more interesting to me because she's becoming more and more seamlessly incorporated into this painting. And even if I didn't want to touch the image at all, it still would have looked fine the way it was integrated, had been integrated into there. So, but back here, can you see that I have the need to pull you up a little bit here with your eyes? So this is an area where I'm going to add a bit more intensity. I'm going to use a bit more water on my brush. Whoops. So that was a mistake. I went over the helmet and it distorted the shape of the helmet. I'm just going to go around the helmet. But now I'm using the brush more like a watercolor. So I'm actually picking up some of the water or the black in the water on my brush, and I'm just carrying it out a little bit. So this is a pick and choose kind of thing. You don't want to put this black wash everywhere, as I've seen some of you do. You just want to have a little bit here and there to keep it interesting. And that's where we talk about pigments sometimes and paint choices. That's where your heavily pigmented fluid acrylics come from. So I'll say that one again, heavily pigmented fluid acrylics. So your good quality acrylics are not found in, you know, big tubes of paint for $4. That's your student grade, that's your base stuff, that's your background paint. Your fluid acrylics come in these little tiny bottles of liquid paint, but they have so much pigment in them that you use a little drop. And yeah, so, and the ones you guys will see if you follow the Curated Nest, the ones you'll see that we are carrying currently are by Finnabair, I believe. No, yeah, might be. Art Alchemy anyway is the brand, and it's which might be a Prima brand paint, and they have fantastic pigmentation in them and great colors. So a little dab will do you with these, right? Because you don't have to have water soluble crayons and things like that. You can just use your fluids to add a little bit of color here and there. And so that's where I use a lot of black and a little float of white and a little float of different colors will really allow your eye to move through the painting. So you can see how very little black we actually put. I'm going to put a little more back here. How very little black I actually put in this painting. So it's not a matter of outlining, guys. And I know that the help that I've been asked to do with image integration is, you know, how do I make my black so seamless? And I think that the answer is, I mean, practice for sure, but the second one is that how little you actually need. You don't need so much dark value to make these paintings really, and these images really stand out and come alive. We want very, very little and strategically placed. So we've got some here, we've got some here, we've got some back here and a little here, but for the most part it's very subtle, and that's really the takeaway I wanted to give you on that, is that your integrations of your images should be much more subtle than most of you have been experimenting with. So keep playing with that. I'm going to continue to work on this maybe during our next episode or the next few weeks, and then maybe I'll transition it into an encaustic, and then you'll see the whole thing come together. But for now, what I'll leave you with is, because I have worked on this so much and it's very fragile, it's wet, and it's very yeah, it's I don't know when I'm going to get back to it next. So the best practice for me would be to leave it with a really thin spray of a fixative, and so I'm going to use the Mod Podge matte spray fixative, and then that way I'm going to just let it dry like that, so that when I do come back to it, I don't risk losing anything or accidentally spilling my tea on it or whatever, and getting rid of my entire image, because most of it's water soluble at this point. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let me just turn the camera up so I can say goodbye to y'all. Hey guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Dulce. That's very sweet of you to say. I hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, see you later. Have a great week. I'll see you Wednesday. Bye-bye.